Hello, hello. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. It's been a minute, almost a month and some change, and so much has changed. But without further ado, welcome back. We are officially at season 2 of Outreach with Reggie, and it starts right here and right now. And before we dive into anything big, anything heavy, anything world shifting, I just want to take a breath with you. A breath to say thank you for waiting. Thank you for listening. Thank you for still being here. When season 1 ended on October 17th, I closed the door on a chapter that was bigger than a podcast. It was a chapter of becoming, of healing on air, learning in real time, and trusting that the stories I carry mattered, that your stories mattered. And then life moved pretty fast. From October 17th until today, which is November 21st, 2025, 5 weeks. Life gave me moments I didn't expect, changes I did not choose, and even blessings I could have never predicted. In today's episode, it's not an interview. It's not a deep dive topic. It's not even a traditional storytelling piece. More so, this is a catch up, a reflection, if you will, and a testimony. It's a sit down with me for a second and let me tell you what's been going on episode. Because before we build season 2 together, I want to start with transparency, with presence, and with truth. Allow this to be a sit down on the couch and let's catch up. I haven't seen in a while. A family reunion, if you will. Because I always believe that God moves in spaces between seasons, in the pauses, in the waiting rooms. And in these past few weeks, my goodness, there were a whole waiting room by themselves. So today I'm walking with you through the conferences, the advocacy, the behind the scenes work, the moments that stretched me, the moments that humbled me, and the moments that reminded me of who I am and why I do this exact thing. Along with what's been happening around the country, the news, the politics, the culture shifts, everything that shapes our communities, and the stories we walk and talk about on this show. Because season 2, it's not only bigger, it's deeper, it's more intentional. And yes, it's very much more personal. But first, let's start off where we left off. When the finale aired, I thought I was going to be able to take a very long break. I thought about how I was going to shut off the mic, close my laptop, and just be able to breathe. But instead, life said absolutely not, because you, my son, have a lot more work to do. Within days, I found myself flying out, showing up, speaking up, stepping into rooms I used to only dream about. So without further ado, within this next segment, I'll tell you exactly what that means. October 17th hit. I felt a mix of relief and release because we got through season 1. Season 1 had just wrapped. The story had been told. It was a seed in the ground that together we watered, tended to, and allow it to bloom into something great. And for the first time in months, there was silence. Briefly, but there was silence. But that silence didn't last long at all. In actuality, it probably lasted a total of 2 to 3 days. Not even a week. Because I found myself right back to work, actively a part of things, in advocacy rooms and conversations that shaped policy on flights, in hotel hallways, speaking in from the mic, but also speaking from the heart. So, what did that look like exactly? Well, of course, before October 17th, we had the honor and privilege and blessing to join the CARES Movement Makers Summit in Washington, D.C. from October 7th to October 9th, where we, along with many advocates from different parts of the country, that being Los Angeles and New York, and we came together to discuss about how to make real effective change and shape with policymakers within the Senate, or even so much as not so much federally, but also state legislation laws and local legislation laws. And with each group that come from each different part of the country, we had different things of focus. Of course, with all of that, it was my first time flying. And funny enough, I met Raphael Warnock just out of coincidence on my first flight to DC. And that was amazing. And we covered things, not with Raphael Warnock, that just happened chance, but within the CARES Movement Makers Summit, we were able to learn about SNAP and how to advocate for SNAP and regarding youth and care and the work requirements that went along with that. We talked about housing. We talked about Medicaid and the pricing of Medicaid and things like that. And I was so privileged and honored because DC was heavy in the best way, good heavy. And I remember landing and thinking, wow, this is really happening. They invited me once I got over the chills and the scares of a little bit of turbulence. And it was truly a blessing. Because have you ever had a moment where the air feels different? When God nudges you and says, see, I told you you were supposed to be here. That was DC. At the CARES Movement Maker Summit, organized by the the Center for the Study of Social Policy, I wasn't just attending. I was participating, engaging, learning, building relationships with people who carried lived experience like a badge and a burden at the same time. I made new friends. I built community. I stood in rooms where policy wasn't just an idea, it was a responsibility, including how we were able to include our language to shape them. And the crazy part was my podcast, I learned there's many youth with lived experience that are doing podcasts, just not just outreach with Reggie, but many others. I was able to highlight and share what I'm doing to not only share, but to potentially expose a door open for many youth like me to share their story as well. Because when you build something from nothing, like what I've done with this podcast, moments like that hit different. Along with my time at DC, not long after I got back, I found myself standing inside the Georgia Capitol recently, speaking during the Senate Study Committee for Education and Housing. And let me tell you something. When you walk through those doors with lived experience, when you sit in front of elected officials and tell them what housing instability actually feels like, when you speak not only from theory but from memory, you feel the weight of it. And I felt that way. Not in a way that crushed me, but in a way that grounded me. Because advocacy isn't a performance. It is not a title. It is a calling. It's something that sometimes many people choose, but with my story, it chose me. And I'll get into that down the road. But standing in that chamber, I thought about every young person who never got a chance to speak for themselves. Every child in foster care who wasn't heard. Every displaced person whose story was dismissed as unfortunate circumstances instead of policy failure. And I carried them with me. And when the mic turned on, I didn't speak loud. I spoke truth. And within that truth, we're doing a lot of amazing things that you'll learn soon. And then came Denver, the Selfless Love Foundation that happened in a little town in Denver, Colorado. from October 20th to the 23rd. A panel I was honored and privileged to be on about adoption, a lived experience table, a Mountain View hotel room that Omni interlocking backdrop was a reminder that the world is bigger than fear, bigger than scarcity, bigger than the limits we put on ourselves. They chose me for that panel because of my story, because of the honesty I bring to the conversation, because I'm not afraid to talk about the stuff people usually whisper about. Denver was healing. Denver was confirmation. Denver was connection. I shared the stage with people who lived it, survived it, and rose from it. I heard stories that made me pause and say things I didn't know I needed to say, and left knowing that this platform, this podcast, this voice, it matters. Now, as you know, as the next thing we're going to be talking about is the news recently. We made it to the Atlanta news. We had another story, and I'm honored. But outreach, this podcast is never just about me. It is about what's happening around us. And between the finale on October 17th and the world of today, the world was loud. Housing debates intensified nationwide, from federal funding disputes to local eviction spikes hitting Atlanta, Denver, Baltimore, and LA. Education policy hearings picked up, especially around school funding inequities and literacy standards. Youth mental health numbers came out for fall 2025, showing record demand and limited access. Child welfare reform discussions escalated. Multiple states announcing policy programs, lawsuits, or new oversight proposals. Local elections shifted power in several cities, with new mayors running on justice, housing, and equity platforms. Community violence numbers sparked conversations about neighborhood displacement and public safety. Again, linking back to the issues you talk about on this show, you'll weave these into the next segments, but here they serve as the backdrop, the why now for season two. And then there was everything else, rebuilding my entire podcast after the RSS feed wipe, preparing for season two, trying to get funding, building my GoFundMe, applying for awards, still making TikToks, LinkedIn posts, Instagram reels, YouTube videos, still carrying the weight of advocacy work on my shoulders. It's been a lot. But here I am. And here we are. Season two begins because I couldn't find it in me to quit. Just like how many of you out there when you feel like the world is on your shoulders and it becomes hard to bear, you don't quit either. So season two is here because we still show up. Now, I want to be clear with you. What I'm about to say is both personal and practical. The last 5 weeks were not just a spiritual season for me. They happened inside a country that is shifting under our feet. And those shifts, those movements matter because policy is not academic. Policy hands in people's lives. They land right there in the palm. So let's start with the shutdown because that was the hard, undeniable backdrop to much of this past month. On October 1st, 2025, the federal government entered a shutdown. Economists and budget analysis warned the impact would be large. The Congressional Budget Office estimated losses between $7 billion and $14 billion, depending on how long the stoppage lasted. And hundreds and thousands of federal employees were furloughed or released, let go during the early weeks of the shutdown. That meant delayed service, paused programs, and a real strain on families who relied on federal supports. Yeah. Now, why does that matter for the conversations we have on this show? Because when federal operations slow, housing programs, feeding programs, and even enforcing the enforcement of fair housing rules get stretched thin, HUD, or the Housing of Urban Development, had to consider deep staffing impacts. Hundreds of layoffs were floated, and fair housing enforcement can't function well when staff and funding are uncertain. That undermines long term protections for communities already vulnerable to displacement. At the same time, there were glimmers of policy movement in that matter. The Senate advanced a bipartisan package called the ROAD, or the Road, my apologies, the Road to Housing Act of 2025. An ambitious bill with dozens of provisions aimed at increasing supply, modernization programs, and supporting affordability. It moves proposals from zoning reform, manufactured housing investments, and program oversight into the conversation, and that could translate into real options for families if implemented faithfully. But legislation is a path, not a guarantee. The text is promising, yet every stage after that requires funding, oversight, and political will. Another front of this crisis is mental health, especially in schools. Earlier this fall, the Education Department cut roughly $1 billion in school based mental health grants. Funding meant to support school counselors, school psychologists, and student behavioral programs. A federal judge recently found those cuts unlawful and ordered restoration of the grants, which is a win, but it's a reminder. When dollars are removed, services don't snap back overnight. The trauma, the untreated anxiety, the missed counseling sessions, those impacts linger even after a court order. And then there were the basic needs that keep people fed. The SNAP program, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, saw changes this season that affect benefit it affected benefits and the amounts of those benefits and eligibility. Guidance from the USDA's Food and Nutrition Service indicated that a reduction in maximum aliments effective November 1st of 2025. Pretty much all what was allocated within those benefits were reduced as the top of November. And several states are implementing new work requirement rules for able-bodied adults without dependents. Now, what does that look like altogether when you reduce what you would receive from SNAP at that moment? Well, realistically, that looks like fewer dollars on on the people's EBT accounts, and more households are forced to scramble for groceries. In this state of Georgia, for example, the state announced the implementation of updated able-bodied adults without dependents work requirements that also happened on November 1st, following the federal policy changes, which is a direct hit on the people that are trying to make ends meet. Put those pieces together for a second. Government stoppage, threats to housing enforcement, uncertain grants for mental health, and SNAP reductions. And what do you have is a policy environment where the safety net looks threadbare for the people who are in need the most. That is not an abstraction for me. That is the context for people I speak with on this show who I aim to speak for on this show, rather, which is the aunt who is trying to feed the nephews, the young person who's one missed paycheck away from eviction, the student who needs a counselor who isn't there. No fault because they don't want to, but simply because the systems that are in place don't allow them to be. And yet, through the noise, there are both failures to call out and solutions to lift up. The road bill could change zoning and unlock more affordable housing. The judge's ruling on mental health grants is a legal check that matters. And the community organizations that keep doing the day to day work where policy comes up short will be spotlighting those solutions this season. The policy wins you might not hear about in the headlines, and the grassroots projects that actually move the needle on the ground. So before we move on, I want to say something raw and honest. I felt completely unqualified and discouraged. I felt small at times when I saw these headlines. How would I address them, you know? How would I put these things together for people to understand? The headlines about economic loss and HUD staff cuts and I immediately wondered really, what can one voice really do to try to do anything like that? Right? And then I remembered something I learned in season one, while doing season one, that the microphone doesn't have to be a sledgehammer. It could be a lantern, a flicker, if you will. It could definitely light one house, one block, one community hearing at a time. And that's why this season will pair. We will pair with data with story. When I say housing crisis, I'll bring the bill numbers and the real people. When I say mental health, I'll bring both the judge's ruling and the counselor who shows up to school and stays late for a single student. When I say snap, I'll talk about policy and then go to the grocery store with someone trying to figure out how far their weekly their weekly balance will stretch. And finally, and this matters, the systems we're talking about aren't neutral. They haven't always been designed for equity. HUD staff reductions, the capricious funding decisions, and the punitive work requirements often land the hardest on Black neighborhoods, foster youth, single parents, and people who have already been pushed to the margins. That's why faith and advocacy intersect on this show, because moral urgency meets policy. Our faith tells us what's right, our reporting tells us how to fix it. So that's the landscape. That's the reality behind the feelings. And next, I'll tell you what this means for season two and how we will respond, where we'll focus, and how I'm asking you to help, not only as donors only, but as witnesses, as volunteers, as community that we've built together through season one until now. As community organizers, we'll talk practical action steps, partnerships that we're building, and the stories that I'm already lining up. Because telling the news is one thing. That's journalism. That's you can get that on your local news station. Walking with people through it, however, that's where the work begins. Okay, now that we have laid out the challenges, let's talk about the wins, the hard work, rather. The ones who are stepping up, the policies and programs underway right now as of November 21st, 2025, which is the time and date of this recording, that are putting life into action. Because, yes, we need advocacy, but we also need hope. We need action. We need the build. So let's start with SNAP benefits and food security. As we revisit food security because it touches everything: youth, families, communities. As of November 14th, 2025, it was reported that across many states, full payment of November Supplemental Nutrition and Assistance Program, also known as SNAP, benefits have resumed following the end of the shutdown. In Georgia specifically, the Department of Human Services announced that full SNAP benefits for November will be issued by November 18th for those who had already received partial payments, meaning families that were facing a cliff now have relief as the holidays roll in. The safety net is being reinforced even if the pause was painful. What that means for people like us is that not just that the benefits came back, it's that systems recognized urgency and states acted. But it also means we're watching how states implement it, how long delays are, and whether this relief is consistently reaching the people who need it. Number two, the government shutdown ended. Federal machinery back online. On November 12th, 2025, the longest ever U.S. federal government shutdown, which was 43 days, officially ended when Congress passed the Continuing Resolution Fund, many major departments through January 30th, 2026. This means HUD, USDA, agencies that manage housing, nutrition, and youth services now have funding stability for the moment. And this matters because when agencies are properly funded, the enforcement of fair housing grants for youth/workforce development and mental health programs keep moving. For this podcast, this means stories you tell are rooted in functioning policy, not just in crisis mode. Also, some states stepped in when federal support was paused. For example, New York released full SNAP payments to approximately 2.9 million New Yorkers despite initial federal guidance. These responses showed what happens when local leadership takes initiative and what we'll spotlight this season rather. Communities doing life-saving work when systems lag. And then this next one, from policy to community projects. What we'll look at this season is zoning reform and manufactured housing initiatives built into the Road to Housing Act of 2025. School-based mental health grant restorations and how nonprofits are deploying those funds in challenged districts. Food bank networks expanding across metro areas, partnering with federally funded programs to cover gaps during state delays. Why this matters? Because you, as a listener, why this matters to you, or why it should matter. Because I want you to know those aren't big talk items. These are options to plug into. Because if you care about housing, we'll spotlight community land trust, modular home builders, teacher housing pilot programs. If you care about kids or youth advocacy, we'll pull stories of after-school programs using newly restored funds to keep counselors on payroll. And that's what we'll do with that. And lastly, if you've been listening to us this far from day one, you're not just a listener, you too are a partner. And here's how you can start right now within the partnership that we have together. Check your state's SNAP benefit status. If you or someone you know was affected by the November delay, investigate your state Department of Human Services. For example, Georgia's Department of Human Services memo from November 13th. Another thing you can do is reach out or volunteer with local housing justice organizations. Find out if your city has teacher housing pilots, manufactured housing advocacy, or zoning reform efforts. Also, share your story. People like you with lived experience who's living in this in real time matter. Use what you get from this podcast, social media, your local groups to say, here's what this looks like up close. Even if it means if it's in your community or in a different state, use the models that you've seen these things work in and share them with your local legislator, your community. And lastly, stay aware because as you heard earlier, even when benefits resume and funding returns, the real measure is implementation. Are people really getting the support they need in time? Are funds reaching local programs? I'll bring these checks and balances into every episode this season because we're going to be walking into a lot more intentionality. And what I want you to feel after this segment is two things. Yes, the world is broken in parts. Policy fails, systems lag, and people get left behind. But what I also want you to feel is, yes, the world is being rebuilt right now. Places you'll hear about this season and problems will track together, along with solutions that we will lift. And because we are doing this together, this show isn't only my mic, it is your voice too. With that said, we are back. And what am I bringing to season 2 while we are back? Because before we close this welcome back episode, I want to talk about what I'm bringing into the new season and what you are bringing too. Because the truth is, in my absence, in my time away, life has been lifing. Life has been really moving in ways that I just didn't see. I traveled. I spoke nationally. I met with leaders that are doing this work actively, that are in these rooms that have saw these systems right up close and have felt the weight of advocacy, witnessing the gaps, witnessing the wins, and somewhere in the middle of all of that movement that I've done, I have changed. How have I changed? I'm not exactly sure, but hopefully we can find that out together. Because this season, I'm bringing a few things in that bag of change. To start, it's clarity. Being in Washington, D.C. at the CARES Movement Maker Summit, to there from being at the Selfless Love National Think Tank, being on panels, being highlighted, all of it, right? The glitz and glamour of it all. It reminds me to stay rooted, and I have to be rooted in what we started with. Because this podcast isn't just content, right? It's not numbers and analytics. It's not something that you can just paint. It's calling. It's a fulfillment. It's a promise. It's advocacy. And it's bridge building. It's how we are able to make sure we be honest with ourselves. And along with what we do here, it is also courage. The shutdown, the snap crisis, all of it in reality. It is a necessity that we talk about and capture these things. The housing uncertainty, it showed me something. People struggling in silence that are refused to keep silent. They're making these things known, how it's affecting their community and how to be a part of it more and more every day. So this season, I am committed to talking about the things that are needed to talk about. Bureaucracy failures, poverty narratives, community trauma, foster care experiences people pretend don't happen, leadership accountability, not just from a distance, but from lived experience. I also bring in my bag a wider lens because season 1 was powerful, but it was local. Atlanta, Georgia. community, youth and care, foster youth, broadcasting. Season 2, we're zooming out and in national policies, international moments that impact the U.S. media and democracy, state reforms, nonprofit failures, and heroes. What is happening in communities that look like ours across the country. Because this podcast does not stop at the county line. I also bring a promise. No matter how big, how much visibility that this platform becomes, I will remain rooted in the same truth. People deserve to be seen, understood, advocated for, and a guide to how to get there. Now, what I want from you to bring in your bag for season 2, if you're listening right now, I'll ask to bring your story. DM me, email me, leave a voice note. Your story might be the exact thing someone else needs to hear. Bring your curiosity, ask questions, challenge these narratives, push for clarity when you do not understand something I cover. This podcast is meant to be like a conversation, not me talking at you, me talking with you. Bring your heart. We talk heavy things on this show. Foster care, housing, poverty, media representation, justice. But if you bring your compassion, these conversations stay human, not political. And bring someone with you. Share this podcast, not for the numbers, but because someone in your circle is fighting something silently and needs these conversations too. And what can you expect from this season? Season 2 will bring deeper reporting, facts, data, sources, breakdowns, more guests, people with lived experience in the care system, policy leaders, advocates, educators, and media figures, if we can, because we are still new with this will make 14 episodes. But we're growing. Along with that, we'll bring community stories, not just headlines, but voices beneath them, national and global contexts, how today's news shapes tomorrow's communities. Faith anchored reflection because your calling and your healing journey matters too. So, with that being said, I just want to say thank you. Season 1 changed my life in so many ways. And so have you, the listener. That's why we're in partnership. At least I hope so. Take me up on that. And now stepping into season 2, I'm not the same person I was when this journey started, right? When this journey started, I was working for a very mean, very tough warehouse company. And I was very mad. I was very angry. I was very sad. But now I'm stronger, more grounded, more called, more clear about why God placed this platform in my dreams for years on end and has placed this platform in my hands and has guided every step. This season, I'm giving you everything. My voice, my advocacy, my truth, my heart. So welcome back to Outreach with Reggie, season 2. And together with this partnership that'll help you take me on and grow with me and walk with me with, let's build, let's heal, let's get free. Together. Take care.